International Medical Corps is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. And we've proven time and time again that our mission is relevant and our model works, even in the most under-resourced and forgotten places on Earth. And as we all know today, we're facing multiple massive challenges across the globe. Some would say that we're in a state of permacrisis. We're facing a series of interconnected challenges that really are making it difficult for people. Economic instability, widespread war and conflict, displacement and migration, climate-related natural disasters are increasing, like heat waves, flooding, and drought. And of course, there's also potential for another global pandemic. So, as we face all of these challenges, it's an incredibly complex humanitarian landscape in front of us, and there are fewer and fewer resources available to meet these incredible challenges. But our team is there, and today we have 3 of our longtime humanitarian experts to share how we are tackling these challenges and why we know we're making a meaningful impact. So I'd like to start by introducing you to Dave Eastman. He's our Senior Director of International Programs, managing what we call our East platform. That includes major hotspots like Afghanistan, Sudan, Somalia, and many other countries. And then we have Dr. John-Kall, one of our senior health advisors, who provides technical support and training to our health teams across the globe. And Paula Olson, our Director of International Programs, managing our West platform that includes Mali, Central African Republic, Venezuela, and more. So all of you have a tremendous amount of experience in the humanitarian sector, and I realized as we were putting this panel together that collectively we have over 60 years of experience with International Medical Corps, almost eligible for Medicaid. So International Medical Corps is often the first on the ground when emergency strikes, but we also go to places where other organizations won't go, some of the hardest to reach and most dangerous places. Right now, we're deeply entrenched in one of today's largest humanitarian catastrophes, and one that's being vastly underreported here in the United States, and that is Sudan. A few years ago, Sudan was relatively peaceful and marching toward democracy after a brutal conflict that we all remember in the mid-2000s. But about a year ago, military factions within the government began fighting for power and control, and conflict erupted in the capital city of Khartoum and then throughout the country. Now Sudan is considered the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. Millions are facing famine, and some 25 million people are in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. We've been working there since 2004, and we support more than 70 health facilities across the country and run more than 60 stabilization centers for people facing malnutrition. Dave, can you kind of break down for us sort of what's going on in Sudan and how we're responding?
Yeah, thank you. And it's funny that you call us experts, because I don't think you can ever be an expert in this job. You never know what you're going to get. But we keep at it. So I don't like tax day, April 15th, but tax day last year, 2023, was a particularly bad day. It's when the conflict broke out in Khartoum. You may remember some of the news of airstrikes at the airport. Our office happened to be about 4 blocks away from that airport. We thought it was a good idea in case you had to evacuate to be close to the airport, but actually when there are F-15s flying over and bombing it, it's not a safe place to be. It was a very tough time. But since then, we've been able to maintain our services. It's a big country. So if you can imagine, from the east coast of Africa and the eastern border of Sudan to the western border of Sudan, the western border of Sudan is smack dab the center of the continent of Africa. That's how big the country is. And a huge portion of that country is in conflict right now. There were airstrikes in Niala, which is a major town in Darfur, just yesterday. People were affected by that. We have clinics and health services there in Niala. I don't know if you knew about that, but it's not stopping. And because of this conflict, people don't have access to food. There's a huge portion of the population that's now facing starvation. But because we've worked there for 20 years, we have a huge cadre of Sudanese staff that have been working in the Ministry of Health facilities, IFC facilities, that have been trained in healthcare and mental health care, psychosocial care, providing water, nutrition services. And so when tax day came around last year and the conflict broke out, we didn't stop services. They continued because they were there in place in their communities, and they're still doing it now. And now that we're able to, our international staff has been able to re-enter the country in the last few months, and we're getting supplies back in. We're better and better able to support the people that have been trained and working with us for so long. So it's good to see, but I do have to say that we are looking at Sudan being the most underreported crisis globally in the next year. A huge portion of the country is living in areas that we call IPC4. We love to talk about acronyms, but that's when you're on the brink of famine. So, and that spills over into the surrounding region, Chad, South Sudan, and internally in the country. So we're really keeping our eye on that. The UN just published a report on it. And it's a country that I oversee, so we're going to put a lot of energy, and hopefully with your support, we'll try and scale up and really face this nutrition crisis at the same time.
Jill, you were really present for many years in Darfur in the mid-2000s, and to see Sudan kind of fall back into conflict, I mean, that must weigh heavy on your heart. I mean, maybe you could reflect a little bit about, your time back in the mid-2000s, and then what you think about what's happening today.
It's when I hear the news about Sudan, it's actually really bittersweet because, we did a lot of work in Sudan. We did a lot of work in Darfur specifically. I was out there for almost 2 years with the team there, and they were very motivated to work. And then to see this happen so many years later, it's really sad. But, on the other side of it, and this is kind of what I try to take personally, so I'm not depressed all the time. To be fair, one of the things that I'm most proud of is that we have staff that used to work for us when I was there, and they stayed with IMC for this long period of time, and it is now those staff that are actually working and leading the response. And that's amazing because in Darfur, no international staff are there. It's just too dangerous. Dave was talking about Niala, that's where I was based. So I'm intimately familiar with the people there, et cetera, et cetera. But our staff that are working there, they take all the personal risk, but they know what they're doing. They are really forging forward to provide those services for people that are in need. And so for that, I'm really proud of it because I think that really speaks to our whole kind of mantra of relief to self-reliance, right? But the other thing that I'm really proud of that I don't think I can take any credit for, or any of us could, is the fact that our staff have motivation and compassion, right? Because they could have left, they could have tried to leave, but they didn't. They decided to stay within their communities and help their fellow people, their community members, right? And I think that motivation and compassion is not something you can teach, right? It's in you. And we are so blessed to have staff that took the learning and are really applying it. So even though, it makes me really sad when I hear the news and everything, at least I know in my heart that, not only did we do our part to kind of build that resilience, but that our staff are really motivated and they're very compassionate and they decided to stay and help their own communities.
As Dave mentioned, it quickly turned into a regional crisis, and more than 1 million people have fled into neighboring countries. And Paula, could you talk a little bit about the spillover effects of the crisis and how it's impacting sub-Saharan Africa?
Absolutely. And first, because I like to start everything with an attitude of gratitude, just wanted to say thank you to everyone who took their time to be here today. And I know that International Medical Board, for you, this is our hometown, right? So it's always so great coming back to our hometown and seeing everybody. And the faces in this room are so inspiring for us to go back and tell our staff that there were groups of people willing to learn about this and to hear about this that really want to make a difference for what we're doing in the field. So thank you again for being here. As Dave mentioned, Sudan is smack dab in the middle of the continent. It means it has a lot of borders, and it means those borders are porous. Those borders are very fluid. There were a lot of other countries that were seeking refuge in Sudan. prior to this crisis. And I'll speak specifically about Central African Republic, CAR, because at one point, the statistics on CAR were that almost 40 to 50% of the population were living elsewhere because of the crisis in CAR. There are multiple crises, political crises, economic crises, going on a regular basis. And so a lot of the population has sought refuge in other countries. And what happens often with these conflicts is that things can turn around like that. Your refugees one day become IDPs another day, internally displaced people. That can shift overnight, and that's exactly what happened when this crisis took place. We saw waves of people. I mean, I saw the videotape from our IMC staff when they were at the borders, and this was happening in CAR, of over 120,000 people crossing the border, and mainly women and children, because men were being left behind to fight. And so you had CAR, people who had sought refuge in Sudan, now coming home to a home that they don't recognize anymore. They left a long time ago. And that's a scary thing, to all of a sudden be displaced once again within your own country. So what that means is that there are a lot of services that now have a lot of pressure on those services to give health care, to give nutrition, to give protection services to people who really need it. I'm proud to say that International Medical Corps was the first organization on the ground providing those services, and not only providing protection services for gender-based violence, but also mental health and psychosocial support, which I think often does not get reported in what we do. But that MHPSS component is critical when, as Nancy made in her remarks, you lost everything, and some of these people have lost everything twice, right? The other thing that's happened is, Chad has become a real hub for a lot of the spillover from the crisis in Sudan, and where we are actively looking to support operations. We have a cross-border operations with Dave's platform that have been working for a while, and I'm happy to say, I'm very proud to say, that in just a few days, International Medical Corps will be running one of the newest camps that have been put up. It's called Bugui, in the eastern part of the country, where we will be welcoming a population of over 50,000 that are already there. So I was talking to someone earlier about the Field of Dreams concept. If you build it, they will come. They're already there. And we have to build around it, and we're trying to provide services where there are no services. But spillover effects, I love this question because spillover effects are not always bad. They also can be very positive. And while it's difficult to say that a war is a good thing, it's not a good thing. But what can happen is that we start looking at the collective power of the communities inside the country to elevate that work more. And so I'll give you an example of what's happening in Nigeria right now. When the Ukraine crisis took place and took off, a lot of the world's grain supply comes from Ukraine. And I think we all found that out pretty early when we started looking at prices of basic commodities in our supermarkets, right? But also Ukraine supplies almost all of the ready-to-use therapeutic foods that we use to fight malnutrition, particularly severe acute malnutrition. And so when that took place, we had shortages all over my region. So in Cameroon, we were seeing shortages. In Mali, we were seeing shortages, CAR. We had to lean on regional supplies of these goods and services to help populations. But then what took place was that in Nigeria, there were actually lots of plants that could already make this type of good. And so with the World Food Program, WFP, and also a lot of backing from WHO and other partners, they've opened 5 plants in Nigeria that can now produce this in country and be able to give that to others in the region. And that's a positive thing that has come out of that. And International Medical Corps was part of the decision-making process. We're on the cluster, we're co-cluster lead for the nutrition cluster in Nigeria, and we were part of that process to take place.
Well, one of the other really challenging places that we work is Afghanistan. It's where International Medical Corps first started, as Nancy mentioned, and we're still there today. We've been there through many regime changes and conflicts and disasters. And while the country is in a long-term crisis today, in some ways we've seen the success of our commitment there to training and capacity building. In fact, just this past week, there was severe flooding in Afghanistan. It killed more than 300 people, and our team on the ground was one of the first responders. We're also one of the few organizations that's still operational there, and we have more than 1,000 people on our team. Dave, you started your career in Afghanistan, right? Can you talk a little bit about how International Medical Corps navigates this complex environment and still makes an impact?
Yeah, thank you. So I went to Afghanistan first in spring of 2001 when Nancy told me to go. And then I was working with Afghans that International Medical Corps had been working with cross-border. It was an Afghan local organization. So they had all the expertise, so they took me along. And we were in Western Afghanistan in a camp of displaced people, about 100,000 people under the Taliban. So one of my very first negotiations was in a tent with a Taliban, whatever he was, with an AK-47 on his lap, drinking tea. But we got in and we started services, but then unfortunately, of course, there were the attacks on September 11th, and a few days later I had to evacuate and make my way in from the north, and we reestablished. So I've seen how, from those beginnings working with an Afghan local NGO with that expertise that had already been developed by working with International Medical Corps, and then over the decades, those same people, many of them are still with us. The one woman in particular, her name is Dr. Shamail, and she was in Pakistan when I was there in 2001, and she is now the Deputy Country Director for Programs, which is essentially the second to the Country Director. And because of her expertise, because of the respect that she has, and because when the transition in government happened in August 2021, we did not stop services. And because of the respect that we had for maintaining our services all through these 40 years, and continuing the services even then, and because of her awareness of the needs of the women and children in Afghanistan, we continued providing nutrition and maternal child health services, and even counseling for women who are stressed and depressed because of what's happening. And she and the country director, who, by the way, was a Syrian refugee, he was a pharmacist, who was trained and developed a career with the International Medical Corps. Now he's the country director for Afghanistan, which is one of our largest programs globally. The two of them started an internship program where young women can't find jobs. In fact, when you're 12 years old, if you're a girl, you have to stop school. You can't go to the park if you're a woman. If you're on the street, you need to be accompanied by a man. And if I can just stand up, you probably have never worn a burqa, but I've tried them on. The burqa is the blue Pac-Man looking thing that they have to wear. And it has a little grilled mesh that covers, that you see through. But what most people don't know is that it's actually cut a bit short in front. So in order to hold it closed, you have to hold it like this, and you have to hunch over when you walk. So it's just inherently designed to kind of make you feel a bit less. So you can imagine how depressing it would be to be a young woman or a professional woman these days. And with this internship program, we brought on 5 young women, and one of them has already been promoted to a finance officer, which is great to see. We're providing psychosocial services in these remote areas where women have a career because they work in health. The Taliban will allow them to work in health. They're providing counseling for depression and anxiety for other women who come in. And if their children are sick, they can help them with that too. And they're so proud and they're so happy to be helping other women and just get out of the house. It's just so great to get out of the house. We're also giving psychosocial services and just groups for teenage girls to get together. When you go to some of our centers, in the back of the center, there'll be a room, it's a lovely room with carpets and pillows, and they're just doing crafts. One of the crafts you'll see on the table up in the area in the sun there, they brought me a suitcase full of all the women came from all over Afghanistan, all the women's groups. and they presented me all of these crafts that they made. So there's like a carpet kind of tapestry that's on that table. So they made that, and they were so proud that you were going to see that. But again, these teenage girls who have to wear a little COVID mask, they're wrapped in this. This is their time when they get out. I mean, you know how important it is for teenagers to get together. So they just get to sit for a few hours and just do something besides being inside and having to memorize the Quran, quite frankly. So we're doing more, health and nutrition. These are all very important things in war zones, but we also do more than that. We're giving people, these young people, just hope and a break, and these women's careers. And that, for me, that I came away, thankful to Dr. Shamail for maintaining that, but really happy and really inspired that you could see the light in their eyes was still there because of what was happening.
Well, we always say that International Medical Corps' differentiator is our focus on training, even in these really volatile environments. But strengthening local capacity kind of looks different from country to country and context to context. But another place where we've made significant investments in local capacity is in Ukraine. Over the past 2 years, we've scaled up our response and have reached more than 10 million people with services and training and restoring access to healthcare services. Our response throughout Ukraine is specific to the context in which these communities live. But maybe, Jill, you could kind of talk about the training programs that we're carrying out and how that's making a difference in Ukraine.
Sure. So I think when we first went to Ukraine, one of the things that we noticed is that Ukraine was a functioning European country. So it was really unlike any of the other countries that we went to. So all their health systems were functioning, their government was functioning, etc. So I think, we really looked at how to pivot and be flexible and adapt to the new kind of context. So we went out and we did different assessments, and one of the things that we noted was that although there's a lot of surgeons available, etc., and they're used to seeing trauma, but the trauma that they would see are things like road traffic accidents or farming accidents or something like that. But war trauma is different. Okay, so children with shrapnel injuries, blast injuries, those kind of things, very, very different from what they usually see, on a daily basis. So what International Medical Corps did was we went back to one of our longstanding partners, Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, and we worked with them to kind of develop a curriculum that could be adapted to the context, that could be repeated in the field, and also had a TOT component. TOT stands for Trainer of Trainers. So in that component, we were teaching those people how to become trainers so that they can cascade this training onto other people, right? And so we started doing that with the help of Harvard Humanitarian Initiative, and we started going out and getting these staff to come and get this trauma training. And the training was for doctors, for nurses, for ambulance workers. It was across the board. And one of the great things is that it has gone now from international people going in and training people. Now we're in phase 3. And phase 3 has been handed over completely to Ukrainians. And now what you see is Ukrainians training other Ukrainians. And that's really what we want to see, right? But the other thing that I do want to bring up is that program, when we first started it, the reason why we were able to go out and do this almost immediately was honestly because of private donors like yourselves. So I think it is to your credit that you are part of our first response. You are part of the reason why we're able to respond so quickly when really not a lot of other organizations can. Because we do have larger, institutional donors, but by the time their funding kicks in, it takes a while. So a big thank you to you guys, because I think you are really integral to our ability to be flexible and to get out there and start our services as soon as we possibly can. Because in every emergency, the needs at the very beginning are just immense. And if we didn't have that additional support, it would be really difficult to get there and help all those people.
Well, the other global conflict that we're all following on a daily basis is in Israel and Gaza. After the attacks of October 7th, International Medical Corps immediately began to mobilize. We are supporting one of our longtime partners in Israel, JDC, as they're helping communities recover and rebuild. And since we already had an operating presence in Gaza when the conflict started, we began expanding our operations there. Our team in Gaza, more than 500 strong, have been working over the past 8 months to set up 2 field hospitals. We have one in Rafah that has served more than 60,000 patients since it's opened on January 6th. It is the last remaining trauma center in southern Gaza. And we've established a second hospital in Darabella in the middle region of Gaza. And that hospital is going to focus on maternal and child care. We often forget in war that life goes on and that women and children still need services. So that hospital will focus on maternal and child health care. But, I mean, as we all know, the health system is essentially collapsed in Gaza. Maybe, Jill, you can talk a little bit about how our field hospitals are filling that critical gap.
Sure. So I think everyone has seen the news and they know about what's happening in Gaza, but the reality of the situation is that there are really no health services available. And I think all of us know that no matter what crisis you personally are having or what elections are coming up, etc., people still get sick. People still have babies. Your kids need vaccines. I mean, you need surgery if you have, an abscess. So this is normal, across the globe. The difference is that we have access, right? We have access to some of the best physicians, the best surgeons in the world. I mean, you're in Los Angeles, right? And so I think sometimes we kind of forget that that's not necessarily the case in a lot of other countries. So in the other countries that we work in and in Gaza, the health needs are so high that, I think International Medical Corps really went out of their way, the team went out of their way to really look at how we could get in there as soon as we possibly could. So we went in there, and as Rebecca said, our first hospital opened January 6th. So when it opened, they were seeing maybe 200 people a day. And within the week, it had rocketed up to 650 people a day. Because the needs
Last week, it was 1,200 people.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay. So, I mean, just because the needs are just increasing, but where are people going to go for healthcare when there's no access to healthcare? And I think that's something that we do really well, because when we go into these emergencies, what we're doing is providing access to healthcare. And I think, I don't know, you guys might have heard that people say like health is wealth, but it's really true. Think about the last time you had a toothache or a migraine, and you can't get anything done, And one of the other things is, so this is how we are meeting the needs. I was really happy that we're opening the second hospital that's really focusing on maternity health and children, because these are some of the most vulnerable populations in any country at any time. But especially during a conflict or a famine or anything else, they are really vulnerable. So we have this hospital that's really specifically looking at pregnant women, new mothers, children, to make sure that they have the access to health services that they need. Then in addition to that, the other thing that we also have to note is, again, just like I was saying earlier, a lot of our staff are local staff. And they could have easily kind of, said, well, I'm trying to get out of here and I don't want to stay and I don't want to help people. But again, it goes back to the motivation and compassion that our teams have in the field. And I think someone asked me yesterday, there's this misconception that people in emergencies are sitting and waiting for help. And I have to say that is absolutely not true. I think I've worked in at least 17 different countries. I have never seen that. So people are motivated. If you can just give them a little something, they're happy to help themselves. They are not waiting for handouts. They want to get their life back to normal as soon as possible. And I think that really speaks to what we do when you go on our website and you see relief to self-reliance, right? People they want to be self-reliant. They don't want to depend on anyone else. So I think when I think about all the work that we're doing in Gaza and we're meeting those healthcare needs, in addition to that, we also are providing mental health services. We're providing child services, child protection services. So we are doing a lot to go out there and meet the needs. But on the other hand, we are helping those people help themselves as well.
So in all of the places that we work across the 30 countries, we know at our core that local communities are the best first responders and where investments will have the greatest impact. For each of you in your different roles, how do you know the work that we're doing today will meet the challenges of tomorrow? Dave, you want to start?
I think that, we see so many crises in the world, and it can be pretty overwhelming. But from what I've seen globally, and what makes, I think, our job so special is that wherever you go, there are good people who do want to do good. And, it's great to work with them and to contribute to what they're doing. So I know that the investments that we make, whether it's helping them in the initial outset of a flood or an earthquake or fighting storms, or training the professionals in finance or warehousing or purchasing or medical skills or how to counsel someone when they have depression, or just teaching them, breastfeeding. I mean, that's still a skill that, some people need to learn. These are things that stay with people. And when you go back 20 years later and you happen to be in a village somewhere and then you tell them you're at the International Medical Corps, they say, oh, I had my child at a clinic in your clinic 20 years ago, International Medical Corps, suddenly you're a hero. That's great. So that's where you see the evidence when 20 years later, and I don't want to say 20 years later, but 20 years later someone comes up and they remembers how they benefited.
Jill, what do you think?
I think the way that we will kind of address challenges in the future is actually looking at our past, because I think Nancy was talking about the 40 years that International Medical Corps has done global work. And I think, for me, every time there's an emergency and it is the worst thing that I've ever seen, I always tell myself, you know what, get it together, because this is probably not the worst thing that you'll ever see. And then we just kind of go on with our work. But for 40 years, we've kind of held to those core values, right? Relief to self-reliance. How do we help people help themselves, etc. And I think that holding on to those core values have really given us the ability to, no matter where we are, we can be flexible, we adapt, we pivot to new contexts. So every new challenge that comes up, I think we just rely on our history of doing that kind of work, of pivoting. COVID-19, who ever heard of COVID-19 before 2020, right? It was new for everybody, but we did respond. We did a lot of work, and I have to say, one thing that I think people also forget is that the amount of people it takes to do this work, it's not just like the 3 of us or 4 of us up here, but we have finance people, we have logistics people, there's so many people involved. And COVID was a huge emergency. It was global. It wasn't even just one country. But we were able to respond because of all the work that we did in the past, And the other thing that I think will help us go forward is really seeing kind of the fruits of our labor. So we're sitting here today talking to you about our capacity building and our flexibility, etc. But I'll just give you one example. One of the first groups to go into Gaza was actually our team from Jordan. So our International Medical Corps team from Jordan, who were working in our hospitals, they were the first group to go in. And I spoke to one of the ER doctors from our hospital in Jordan about how he prepared himself. How did he feel about going? And he said, in Jordan is not a country under attack, right? It's pretty stable. So he was then going into a conflict. And this was one of the first times that he was facing this. But he kind of really talked to his family and he said, this is what we have been trained for, to help other people. So now if we can help other people from within IMC, go to another country, go to another context, and help those people, he said that is what was motivating for him, And so when he went in, he really was changed by the emergency that he saw. But I think when he came back, he was really motivated because I think he kind of really saw and felt, the impact of what International Medical Corps can do. And I thought that was a great story, and I think that's exactly the reason why we will be able to move forward and face anything.
Well, Paula, you are one of the most optimistic and positive people that we know. So give us some inspiration.
I love ending with this question because, yes, I love to think positively about the future of this organization. Celebrating 40 years is no easy feat. The fact that we're going to be celebrating 40 years this fall is incredible. And it's because this organization is so unique. We talk about that all the time, but we truly are a unique organization that inspires, and we're not only life-giving, you know, we're helping people survive, we're also investing in how people thrive. And that's what's going to keep us around for the future. This is an organization that constantly evolves. So if we talk about some of the places where we've invested ourselves, we're looking at climate change initiatives. We have a ton of pilot projects going on right now, and we're incorporating climate change into our future projects. We invest in research. We were talking earlier about in South Sudan how we've built these schools, midwifery schools, to help improve the maternal mortality rate. We're opening a school in just 2 weeks in Central African Republic to do the same thing, or we're going to be building capacity for maternal outcomes there. We also invest in other types of research for global health initiatives. You know, at the onset of the Ebola crisis in the DRC, and DRC is a country where a lot of people do associate it with Ebola because they've had many outbreaks, but always in the western part of the country. So in 2018, it was the first time that had ever occurred in the eastern part of the country. And you would think that with so much experience in Ebola, we would be able to contain it so quickly. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It was happening amidst a political year. There were a lot of different things going on, a lot of warring groups. And so the International Medical Corps worked and set up these Ebola treatment centers and also intake centers to do that. But what a lot of people don't know is that our organization was involved in the first medical trial for which came out of it was 2 therapeutic drugs to treat Ebola. So we've had more survivors now than we ever had before. And this was happening for the first time in an active crisis and an active outbreak in the country. And so why I know we're going to continue to do that is because we continue to invest in that way. And the last reason why I know that IMC will be around for, I hope ever, way beyond me or you or anyone in here, is that we invest in people. We invest in people at the community level, we invest in people at the headquarters level, we invest in people all around. We constantly talk about capacity building, but it makes a difference because more than the services that you will receive, it's who's providing those services that can make the difference for someone who's getting that. And think of yourselves in traveling to various countries. Have any of you ever been sick abroad or gotten sick or had to seek medical services? You go into a health system that you don't understand with people that don't speak the same language as you sometimes. That can be very scary. And so the fact that we are capacity building with people in the community, it means that someone like you is also serving someone like you, right? And so we don't invest in the community, we are the community. International Medical Corps becomes the community wherever we serve. And people will never give up on people.
Well, thank you, Paula, Jill, and Dave. We're really glad that you were able to share your experiences with us. But before we wrap up, we're going to hear from one of our longtime volunteers, Yvonne Gornhout. Yvonne, you want to come on up? She's going to share a little bit about her experience in volunteering with International Medical Corps. But in the meantime, I just want to say, I think that the past 40 years has made us ready for the next 40 years. And so I think that International Medical Corps is ready for these incredible challenges that face us. And with your support, we can really make a difference. So thank you very much.